If you look at Washington on a map, everything seems flat and simple. Small towns, lines of roads, lakes, forests. But zoom in just a little, and the state starts to feel like two different worlds existing side by side, rarely mixing with each other. On one side, there are towns moving at a slow rhythm, thin economies, limited opportunities, and a way of life focused more on getting by than moving forward. On the other hand, there are small pockets heading in the opposite direction, calm, stable, and directly connected to the modern wealth centers round Seattle. What makes it more striking is how close these places often are to each other. The difference comes down to economic paths, job access, and how each place developed over time. On the western coast, Aberdeen tells a familiar story, a small town that once thrived, then slowly fell behind. In its peak years, Aberdeen was a busy logging hub, with trucks constantly moving, an active port, and an economy that rarely slowed down. It is also known as the birthplace of Kurt Cobain, a detail that still shapes its identity today. But when the timber industry declined, the town's momentum faded with it. Today, the median household income in Aberdeen sits around $52,000, far below the Washington state average, which has already passed $80,000. The poverty rate is also relatively high, around 23%, reflecting real financial pressure at the household level. On top of that, the crime rate is higher than in many other small towns across the state. Just minutes from Aberdeen, the small town of Hoquiam seems to live in its neighbor's shadow, and unfortunately carries a very similar story. It was once a key part of the coastal logging network, with an active port, running mills, and a clear economic direction. But when that industry collapsed, Hoquiam lost its footing as well. The poverty rate remains high, often around 20%, showing that economic pressure has not eased. In terms of safety, the crime rate is also somewhat higher than in many comparable small towns. Not extreme, but noticeable in everyday life. What stands out most is the atmosphere. Certain parts of the town feel quiet, with aging buildings that seem to be waiting for a new purpose that is yet to arrive. Sunnyside looks like a town that works hard, but does not always move forward. Unlike Aberdeen or Hoquiam, which were hit by the collapse of older industries, Sunnyside still has an active economy, only much of it is based on low-wage work. Agriculture is the backbone here. Vineyards, apples, and other crops keep the town moving. But the problem is simple. Many jobs in this sector do not offer high income. The median household income in Sunnyside is usually around $60,000, while the poverty rate can reach 20%. That means even when people are working, not everyone can truly move upward. In terms of safety, crime in Sunnyside is not as high as in troubled industrial towns, but social pressure still grows from economic conditions. The town feels alive, not empty or dead, but there is a sense that many families are surviving, not advancing. A little farther from Sunnyside, the small town of Toppenish tells a similar story, but with heavier pressure. Toppenish is known as part of the Yakima Valley agricultural region and is often called the City of Murals because of its many wall paintings showing local history. At first glance, that gives it a unique character. But behind that image, the economic reality is not as attractive as it looks. The median household income in Toppenish is usually around $67,000, below the Washington average. The poverty rate is also fairly high, often close to 20%, making its social pressure more visible than in many other small towns. Many jobs still depend on low-wage agriculture, and opportunities to move into higher-paying sectors remain limited. At the southeastern edge of Washington, right on the Idaho border, Clarkston feels separate from the state's main economic pulse. Facing Lewiston across the Snake River, the two cities are often seen as one area, but that does not mean opportunity is abundant. Clarkston's main problem is not just low income, but the combination of isolation and narrow job options. Poverty is also noticeable, with many residents working in limited sectors such as local services, light manufacturing, or jobs across the river in Lewiston. Because it sits far from major economic centers like Seattle or Bellevue, career mobility becomes much harder. Many people here seem to be holding on rather than moving forward. In terms of safety, crime is not always extreme, but it is still higher than in some more prosperous small towns. Still within the Yakima Valley Agricultural Corridor, Grandview often feels like a slightly quieter version of Toppenish or Sunnyside, but the basic challenges remain the same. The town lives from agriculture, vineyards, fruit crops, and farm processing industries. There is activity, and the economy keeps moving, but the value of that work is not always high. The median household income in Grandview is usually around $61,000, still far below the Washington average. The poverty rate is also relatively high, often around 20%, showing that many jobs here remain low-paying. This is not about a lack of work. In fact, many people are working, but the chance to move into a higher economic level feels limited. In terms of safety, Grandview tends to be more stable than some other worse towns with more visible crime problems. Along the Cowlitz River, Kelso often appears as a small town living between two worlds, not as distressed as the agricultural towns of the Yakima Valley, but not strong enough to be called prosperous either. It grew as an industrial and transportation town, helped by its closeness to I-5 and nearby logistics areas. Economically, Kelso sits in the lower middle range by Washington standards. The median household income is generally around $66,000, still below the state average. This shows that while economic activity exists, prosperity is not evenly shared. Some parts of the city still show the signs of an older town that has not been fully renewed. Along the I-5 corridor between Seattle and Portland, Centralia is often a classic example of a small city that is not dead, but not truly growing either. In the past, it developed as a railroad and regional trade center, an important point in an era when land transportation formed the backbone of the economy. Over time, however, that role slowly weakened. Today, Centralia's economy is mostly supported by retail, services, and a small amount of light industry. Unlike agricultural towns such as Sunnyside or Grandview, Centralia has the advantage of location, sitting directly on the main I-5 route. But that advantage has not fully turned into major growth. Many parts of the city still feel old, with a downtown that rises and falls depending on traffic flow and outlet shopping tourism. In the Puget Sound coastal region, Shelton stands as a small city that does not look empty on the surface, but carries a difficult economic story underneath. It serves as the administrative center of Mason County, surrounded by green landscapes, bay waters, and forest areas that once formed the backbone of its economy. Shelton used to depend heavily on the timber industry. When logging declined, the impact stretched far into the present. The median household income is now around $69,000, still below Washington's much higher state average. The poverty rate is also relatively high, around 17%, showing that some residents remain under steady but serious economic pressure. In Grant County, Soap Lake is one of the most unique small towns in Washington, not because its economy is strong, but because of its distinctive natural identity. The town grew around a mineral-rich natural lake that has long been believed to have healing properties. In the past, Soap Lake even became a small destination for health tourism. But beyond that uniqueness, its economic reality is much simpler. The town is small and depends heavily on seasonal tourism and local services. Poverty is also relatively high for a small town, and job opportunities outside the service sector are very limited. Unlike agricultural towns like Sunnyside or Grandview, which still have an active economic engine, Soap Lake depends more on a natural attraction that is not always stable throughout the year. When tourism slows down, the town slows with it. In terms of safety, it is not known as a dangerous place, but its main challenges are economic stagnation and limited job diversification. After seeing the side of Washington that moves slowly, held back by limited economies and narrow opportunities, one thing becomes clear. Not every small town in this state lives in the same reality. Because on the other side of Washington, there are towns that feel different even in their quietness. More stable, safer, and far more prosperous. Places where survival is no longer the main priority, but quality of life is carefully protected. And that is where the real contrast begins. On the east side of the Seattle metro area, Sammamish stands as one of the clearest examples of how a small city can grow without losing its quiet feel. Surrounded by lakes, forests, and neatly planned suburban neighborhoods, it is often seen as one of the most comfortable places to live in Washington. The median household income here is often around $239,000 or more, making it one of the highest in the state. Poverty is extremely low, and the crime rate is also among the lowest in Washington. Some crime categories are almost statistically insignificant. Its closeness to tech centers like Seattle and Bellevue means many residents work in high-income fields, especially technology, finance, and professional services. Yet what makes Sammamish interesting is that, despite being close to major economic hubs, it still keeps a calm suburban character, not busy, but orderly. Right between Seattle and Bellevue, Mercer Island feels like a small island in the middle of metropolitan wealth. Its location is unique, surrounded by the waters of Lake Washington, yet only minutes from the two biggest economic centers in the state. That combination makes it one of the most prestigious addresses in Washington. If towns like Sunnyside or Kelso struggle with economic limits, Mercer Island sits at the opposite end of the spectrum. The median household income here is often around $220,000, with many households working in technology, finance, and high-level professional sectors across the Seattle metro area. The neighborhoods are well-maintained, the schools are known for high quality, and the infrastructure reflects long-term stability. There is no feeling of struggling here. It feels more like a city already established, moving at a calm and confident rhythm. Only about a 30-minute ferry ride from Seattle, Bainbridge Island feels like a world intentionally separated from the noise of the big city across the water. Once the ferry docks, the atmosphere immediately shifts. Quieter, greener, and far more relaxed than the Seattle skyline in the distance. Bainbridge Island has long been considered an affluent suburban island. Many residents either work in professional sectors in Seattle or hold high-income remote jobs. The crime rate on Bainbridge is also very low, making it one of the safest communities in the Puget Sound region. The neighborhoods are well kept, the schools are strong, and daily life feels stable with little economic turbulence. Homes are spread among forests, shorelines, and quiet small roads, more like a long-term resort than an ordinary town. On the eastern side of the Portland-Vancouver metro area, Camas is often seen as one of Washington's clearest hidden gem suburbs. It is not as large as the Seattle area suburbs, but its reputation keeps rising because of its stable economy, clean neighborhoods, and high quality of life. Camas has grown through a mix of modern industry, technology, and access to the Portland-Vancouver metro economy. Many residents work in professional fields, high-value manufacturing, and technology companies in the surrounding region. The median household income in Camas is around $141,000, making it one of Washington's higher-income small cities. Poverty is relatively low, and the crime rate is also low compared with many denser suburbs. In a green valley surrounded by the Cascade Mountains, Snoqualmie often feels like a living postcard. Waterfalls, thick forests, and a small-town atmosphere that stays carefully organized. But behind its iconic scenery, the city is also one of the most stable suburbs in the Seattle metro area. Snoqualmie has grown within Seattle's economic orbit. Many residents work in professional sectors, especially technology, finance, and high-income remote jobs. The median household income here is around $214,000, reflecting its status as a high-income suburb. Poverty is extremely low, and the crime rate is also low compared with the average small city in Washington. The neighborhoods are well-maintained, the schools are strong, and the city feels modern without losing its connection to nature. In eastern Washington, West Richland has grown into one of the most stable suburbs in the Tri-Cities area. It is not a large city, but its location is strategic, close to Richland, Kennewick, and Pasco, which together form one of southeastern Washington's important economic centers. West Richland has a more diverse economic base. Many residents work in energy, science, and technology, especially in fields connected to research facilities and industry across the Tri-Cities. Poverty is relatively low, and the crime rate also tends to be stable compared with many other small towns in Washington. What makes West Richland interesting is that it still keeps a small-town living feel, less crowded roads, spacious residential neighborhoods, and a calm atmosphere. But behind that, its infrastructure is modern and continues to develop along with the growth of the Tri-Cities. At the northern end of Lake Washington, Kenmore feels like a bridge between suburban calm and quick access to Seattle's economic core. It is not as glamorous as Mercer Island or as elite as Sammamish, but that is exactly its appeal: stable, green, and highly livable. Kenmore has grown as part of the strong Seattle metro area. Many residents work in professional sectors, technology, healthcare, and business services, giving it a fairly stable economic base. The median household income in Kenmore is around $140,000, placing it among higher-income suburbs. Poverty is low, and the crime rate is also low for a city so close to a major urban area. Its residential neighborhoods are well kept, with direct access to the lake, parks, and wide green trails. On one of the most exclusive corners of Lake Washington, Yarrow Point stands as one of the most elite small communities in all of Washington, arguably one of the most high-end small towns in America. Far removed from places like Kelso or Shelton, which still struggle with economic transition, Yarrow Point exists on a completely different level. This is not a working-class town. It is a small residential enclave where many residents work in executive roles, high-level technology, investment, and large-scale business in Seattle and Bellevue. The median household income in Yarrow Point is among the highest in the state, often around $250,000. Poverty is almost statistically insignificant, and the crime rate is extremely low, closer to a quiet private residential zone than an ordinary town. On the eastern shore of Lake Washington, Medina is known as one of the most exclusive addresses in the entire state, often seen as a golden shoreline for Seattle's elite. The town is small, quiet, and almost entirely made up of premium residential areas with a high level of privacy. Medina sits at the very top of the economic spectrum. Many residents are tech executives, founders of major companies, and extremely high-earning professionals from the Seattle-Bellevue area. The median household income in Medina is among the highest in the United States, often estimated around $250,000. Poverty is almost statistically insignificant, and the crime rate is extremely low. The environment is highly protected, with quiet streets, large lakefront homes, and security that feels closer to a private community level. Clyde Hill is one of Washington's most exclusive small enclaves, often hidden behind the popularity of its neighbor, Bellevue. The city has no major commercial center or urban bustle. Almost the entire area is made up of carefully maintained luxury homes set on hills with lake views. Clyde Hill sits at the top of Washington's social and economic structure. Its residents are mostly very high-income professionals, especially from technology, finance, and executive roles in major companies across Seattle and Bellevue. The median household income in Clyde Hill is among the highest in the state, often around $250,000. What makes Clyde Hill unique is its position. Even though it sits very close to modern urban centers like Bellevue, it still maintains the atmosphere of a residential sanctuary. No commercial noise, no major distractions, just quiet and exclusive living space. Clyde Hill is a small picture of Washington's suburbia at its peak, modest in scale, but extremely high in standard of living.